I graduated from college and didn't want to go back into the box of being an employee or building or working for somebody else. And I said, real estate sounds interesting. Let me do this. And so I figured out a way to make money with real estate first, flipping houses, wholesaling. But then that kind of parlayed into what I still do today. And what I love is owning long-term investment properties. And so a business partner and I together own a portfolio of rental properties. And we're going to talk about small and mighty. I'm on the larger side of small and mighty. So together we have just under 100 units, but that's about 33 properties. So some multifamily properties. And then, so if you count half of that, my half is about 16, 17 buildings, about 50 units. And we've been, having fun with it for 21 years. And I'm less in the active side of real estate investing now, flipping, doing all that. I love that part of it, but I'm more in just managing the manager and managing a few of our properties. I have kind of a mix of self-management and managing the manager. But that's, the kind of long and short of that is it's allowed me to have financial independence, be able to travel, do a lot of the other stuff that I love to do.
Well, you just kind of dropped the term small and mighty. So we definitely want to unpack that. And it sounds like, you have a pretty good work-life balance. And it sounds like you kind of understand when enough is enough. So like in your perspective, like what is small and mighty?
Yeah, the way I defined it in the book was small and mighty is sort of the opposite of what I learned when I first started becoming an entrepreneur. Because when I first started going to seminars and reading books, it was like the best business person, the best investor is the one who has the most properties, or it's the one who grows the fastest. But then I read books like, Your Money or Your Life. I started kind of getting into the financial independence movement, and I started pushing back on that idea that, wait a minute, like there's this concept called enough, where once you have enough, like the only reason you'd keep growing is because you just want to have fun maybe, or your ego just says you need to keep going. And so like, I'm not against going big because there are reasons to keep growing, but it really made me question, like with our real estate business, like the practical side of it in 2007 in particular, because we hit the Great Recession and things were hard and took a lot of risk by growing a lot early in our career. And so we started thinking about like, wait a minute, like maybe there's an alternative path where the definition of the small and mighty is have the least number of properties possible in order to still accomplish your financial goals. So the least it's about having the most elegant, simple solution to a problem instead of just trying to go, mass and get as much as you can and 10x and go all that. And there's a lot of risk and there's a lot of hassle and there's a lot of cost to going big. And so to me, having that more elegant, simple solution fits perfectly with financial independence, but it's apparently not as popular in the real estate world. There's not most people want to go big,
Of course, yeah. The bigger the better, right? That's America for you. So I actually love your rule number 2. I know you outlined a bunch of rules. We're not going to get into like every single chapter of the book, The Small and Mighty Real Estate Investor, but I love number 2 because, and just for those who haven't read the book, haven't checked it out yet, it's be the tortoise, not the hare when it comes to acquiring properties. And for me, I was kind of that same way. I'm like, look at all these people. Like, I mean, Chad, you're an inspiration to me. You had all these properties. I'm like, I'm going to get a bunch of properties year one. Ended up getting 11 units in my first year. Huge mistake. Didn't know what I was doing. Ended up offloading 5 of those units. It was a whole fiasco that we won't get into now. But could we maybe talk to a previous me or people who are in that exact circumstance where they're looking to get into real estate? They're like, all right, let me get as many properties as possible. Is there like the right cadence? Is there like you should get one house per year? You should get one house per every other year? Like, is there a perfect rhythm or cadence that you've seen with successful real estate investors who are going the small and mighty route?
Yeah, one of my mentors was a guy named John Schaub. He wrote a book called Building Wealth One House at a Time. And his big kind of takeaway, and he encouraged people to, like, you have a full-time job. A lot of people have even if you're working in real estate, you might be flipping houses or doing something else, but on the side with your investment properties, at least buy one property per year. And his point was, like, you don't have to go faster than that. You can, but if you just buy one property per year for the rest of your life, for example, you'll be extremely wealthy. You'll have more than enough. And it's reassuring to know that, like, at a very deliberate tortoise-like pace, you can still accomplish all of your goals. Now, I would kind of add some nuance to that. Like, I think I talked about this in the book too. Like, we go through these phases. Like, you're in a starter phase when you're just getting started trying to learn. You get into this builder phase where you're trying to grow, and you're just trying to grow this small nest egg into a big nest egg. And then eventually you get like the final, financial independence phase where you're this ender or harvester phase. You're actually living off your wealth. And each one of those phases has a little bit different kind of nuance to it. And I think there's a advantage to having like a load up phase or an acquisitions phase where for like 2 or 3 years you're just super focused on buying properties, and that might mean still 1 or 2 properties per year, or in your case, in my case too, I went through this phase of buying like 33 properties in one year, and it was way too many. But I think the way you can know you're going the right pace is that if you can buy a property, take a like virtual deep breath, and like learn from your property, like learn from the mistakes, learn from the good things. Like I grew so fast that I didn't learn anything. And that compounding of knowledge when you're a starter or when you're the early wealth building phase is such a critical piece, because money compounds, right? We all know about that. But your knowledge, like that compounds at an incredible rate. And if you just keep buying and buying and buying without thinking about it, without giving yourself some space between deals, you're not really going to learn. You're like losing one of the biggest advantages, which is like the hard knocks university, the real world university. And in 2007, when I bought 33 properties, it took me until the next year to learn all the lessons that I screwed up in 2007, which if I would have gone a little bit more deliberate pace, I would have learned and pivoted quickly and actually made even more progress and taken even less risk.
I love that. I love that concept of compounding, your lessons learned. Like that's I think I haven't really heard anybody talk about that. That's a cool concept. And it is so true. Like if you're just buying property after property, you don't have enough time to learn anything, to make that second one better, to make that third one better. So slowing down could definitely be a big benefit from a tactical perspective. As someone, they buy that first property, they give themselves that virtual deep breath, they're looking to buy the next ones. Do you have any kind of philosophy around, as far as with that first property, should they be trying to, pay it off as quick as possible, like get a chunk of equity in that, or should they just be focused on saving up money, keep all the debt they can and put it into the next property?
There's always multiple ways to get up the mountain. That's one of the things I try to emphasize. Like some people say like, this is the one way. And like, there's so many different paths that work. Like some people pay off all their properties early on, and then they just are super conservative and recycle that money. So that can work. I think the most optimal way this worked for me and people I've kind of worked with is that you go through that load up phase, like I was talking about. And during that load up phase, every spare dollar you have should be reinvested back into either marketing to buy more properties, or down payments on other properties, or maybe like education and learning. Because I think like, a $25 book, or, we're in the education business. We like that, but I've had enormous returns on those three things, marketing, education, and new properties. And so I like paying off debt, but I think paying off debt is a really good strategy. Once you've built a good nest egg, you built a good foundation, when you're ready to sort of, to use a poker metaphor, to take some chips off the table, it's a really smart thing to do. It's not the most optimal growth strategy, but if you're trying to optimize your life and not just optimize your growth, then actually paying off some debt can make a lot of sense. And my business partner and I did that. We kind of hem and hawed about it. We're like, oh man, we have 3% debt, we have 5% debt. Like we don't want to pay that debt off. But we were at the stage where we were fortunately had enough excess cash flow. We had $100,000 in the bank. And we were like looking at our choices, like, oh, could we go buy another property, put $50,000 down on 2 properties, or $25,000 down on 4 properties? That's kind of the typical way to grow. But then we looked at we had a debt on one of our properties we'd owned for 10 years, and it was $100,000, about the amount of money we had. And the payment was $1,000 per month, or $12,000 per year. And when we looked at that, we're like, oh, wait a minute. Like if you just looked at it from like a cash on cash yield perspective, $100,000 would give us $12,000 per year in free cash flow. It's like a 12% cash on cash return. And we're also reducing our risk. Like we're not having to take on additional debt. And we're also simplifying our life. Like we still have 1 property instead of like 3 or 4 or 5 properties. It was sort of a light bulb moment. I didn't like plan on paying off debt, but it was like that. Okay, at some stage, there are moves like that make a ton of sense, where you increase your cash flow, you decrease your risk, you simplify your life, which is the whole point, right? Going back to like, why are we doing this? Like that, if you want to have a portfolio that gives you that time freedom and the flexibility to do all these other things, moves like that can make a ton of sense.
And so let's kind of continue to build up. So we talked about buying 1 property. Justin kind of hinted at buying an additional property. As you start to accumulate more properties, and I'm sure like it depends on location and how much each one cash flows, is there like a magic number where, I'm guessing a lot of the people that you talk to, a lot of people I know in my personal life, they're not doing this full time. They're not full-time real estate investors. They might have a regular job. They might be an entrepreneur buying properties on the side. At what point can you feel comfortable that like, okay, the cash flow that these properties are spitting out, this is going to cover the cost of my lifestyle?
It's a tricky equation early in the life of your property, because I don't know if you guys have seen this, but like when you first buy your property, it's like a roller coaster. Like, you know, 1 month you don't have a tenant in there and there's no income coming in, and then another couple months you have a heating and air goes out, and then you're spending $6,000 on the heating and air. So it's like all these numbers on your spreadsheet that you bought the property to, like, are just blown up. You're like, what is
Yeah.
this? Like, my property is crazy, you know. But if you look at like a long term trajectory of a property, that up and down roller coaster kind of smooths out. And so what I found, just some practical ways to figure out when you can live off of it, is you want to give your property a couple of years to season a little bit, you know, 2, 3, 4 years, so that you can get your bookkeeping down and actually figure out what your operating expenses are on the property. And your operating expenses, just for those who hadn't used that term before, are things like taxes, your insurance, your maintenance. Those are the maintenance and capital expenses. We could talk about the difference between those two, but those are two of the things that often give you those big up and down swings. Or heating and air is like a big, huge maintenance item that doesn't happen every day. It happens every 10 to 15 years, but when it does happen, it costs a lot of money. And so those things can blow up your cash flow statement, your profit and loss. But if you kind of stabilize your property, maybe you do a big remodel on the front end, so you have a lot of those items done, you can then do a better projection. And so let's say you had 10 properties and you said, all right, these 10 properties rent for, you know, $1,500 per month each, right? So that's $15,000 per month. And you could do a rough estimate, but you could actually run the numbers yourself. But you could roughly say, all right, at least $7,500 out of that $15,000 will be left over after my operating expenses. That's like half of my rent, but probably it'd be more like 50 to 60% of your total rent will be left over after you pay your operating expenses. That's just a rough number that I've used over time. So you want to figure out what your number is for your properties. But let's say it was 60%. So that's, doing math on the fly here. So that's like $9,000 a month left over. You can work it backwards and say, all right, if I paid these properties off, if I had no debt on these 10 properties, is $9,000 per month, like, does that meet my FINE number? Is that my financial independence number? And if it is, then you can kind of say, okay, I'm at the stage now where plowing back some money, paying off debt could make sense, because I've got enough properties to actually pay my bills without having to grow anymore.
And just before we get too far past the like kind of beginner stages, I did want to ask about one part that you had mentioned in the notes you sent over, which is like a buy box for beginners. That's something I'm always interested in picking people's brain on. Is obviously that's the hardest part, right? Like, you make your money when you find the deal, and especially today with these interest rates, like, you know, people are seemingly having trouble finding deals. So for the beginners out there, what are your recommendations?
Yeah, the buy box was such a big aha moment for me. Like, if you're a beginner and you can get this concept, it's one of the most fundamental concepts that'll transform your ability to buy more properties. And I'll give you a comparison. So like we just bought a Toyota RAV4. I love Toyotas. So like my Toyota Avalon that my grandfather drove for years and I bought from the family, like finally went out at 250,000 miles, and I'm not going to fix it up. So we had to buy a new Toyota. But the point is, as soon as I bought this Toyota RAV4, or I'm researching it, I look on the road and there's Toyota RAV4s everywhere. I was like, everybody's driving a RAV4. This is crazy. And I never even noticed that before. Well, this is a concept in our brain called your reticular activating system. And you can use that with real estate investing, because it's the part of your brain, if you tell it what you want to look for, your brain is kind of a focusing machine, and it will focus on the things that you want to have. And so it's the same works for real estate investing. If you build this called a buy box, which is basically just saying, out of all the thousands of properties out there, here's the type of property I'm looking for. And there's a process to build that. Part of that process is doing some research in your market to figure out like which properties are on the high end, like the high price houses, because typically like the most expensive properties in your town are not going to make a lot of sense. For one, they're going to be really big, like 4,000 or 5,000 square foot houses, which is just from a maintenance standpoint, it's a nightmare. You want to get like smaller, simpler houses. And it's going to be hard to have the rent to price ratio makes sense on I'm thinking $500,000 property in a $200,000 market. Like I live in Clemson, South Carolina, where the median price for a single family house is $300,000. So for me to buy a $500,000 or $600,000 property, it's just not as much for a single family house. Doesn't make sense. Now in Washington State and San Francisco, we're talking 1.2 million, 1.3 million for the same kind of $300,000 property here. The point being, you want to figure out like kind of the sweet spot in your market where the rent to price ratio makes a little bit more sense from a cash flow standpoint. And so the numbers are important. You just kind of want to look at the numbers. But you don't want to stop there, because when I was a rookie investor, I just looked at numbers, 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 numbers. And that's important. Like, I like running numbers, but I forgot about this other second part of analyzing your buy box, which is the qualitative criteria of a property. And what I mean by that is, like, think about, you could buy a property that's a simple rectangular box, which is my favorite property, like just a ranch style brick property with a really simple roof line, with a crawl space that has hardwood floors inside and tile bathrooms. You see how specific I'm getting? Like, I actually write out all of that and say, this would be my ideal rental, because it'd be a low maintenance property. It would be attractive enough. It'd be big enough. 1,500 to 1,800 square feet is big enough for most of my tenants. 3-bedroom, 2-bath. And so you can write those kind of things down. And if you're new to this, your real estate agent, your property manager, or your investor friends, they can help you figure out, like, what are the ideal rental properties in your location. You can actually ask people. You can say, like, if Cody was in your town, you could say, hey, Cody, like, what are your easiest properties to rent? If you could have like 100 of the same kind of property, what would you buy? And any experienced investor who's been in it more than a couple of years would be like, oh yeah, this is what I would buy here in this town. And so that's one of the most important steps you could take as a new investor, is to figure out the numbers, figure out what numbers you want, what that ultimately looks like a price range. You're like, all right, I want to invest in the $200,000 to $300,000 properties in this area. But then I want single family houses or multifamily property or whatever, your mobile homes, whatever you're looking for. Actually get pretty specific on that. You can get down to the really details, but I think just like that can help you get to where you start recognizing deals. And when people start doing that, they tell their real estate agent, they tell their friends, they tell their wholesaler list that they're on, they tell people at their clubs or their churches or whatever. All of a sudden, everybody knows what they're looking for. Hey, Chad wants single family houses in Clemson and Central and these zip codes. And I even put it on my email. So when you're emailing people in Gmail, you can put the PS, this automatically like shows up on your email. Instead of having some cheesy signature, put PS, I buy houses in Clemson, Central, and Pendleton. These are the type I'm looking for. Even if it needs work, that's okay. Let me know if you see a property like that. I've bought at least 4 or 5 properties just from the PS on my email. This automated, this is simple, that's free. But it all starts with knowing what you're looking for in the first place, so that you can then tell people about it, what you're looking for.
So I think buy box is one. Like, most new real estate investors just have no idea what to look for. Like, that's like one huge hurdle that people face. Like, I gotta analyze properties. I don't know how to run cash flow projections. I don't know this. I don't know that. I think another big hang up that I hear from friends, family, people on social media is the money piece. And I actually like how you broke this down, Chad. You have like 5, I think it's ways to get started with little or no money. Could you just talk about a couple of those? Because I think that's another huge barrier people face besides the buy box problem.
Yeah, it is. Real estate, if you broke it down into like what the simple version of real estate is, it's really matching a property to money. And you could say, whose money is it? Is it my money? Is it the bank's money? Is it a combination? But it's like a puzzle, and you just got to figure out how to put those two things together. And so it's a legitimate concern. And just to tell a quick story, like when I first started, and I mentioned that I graduated from college, I was a biology major with a German minor, and like I had nothing in finance. Like I could tell you the what is it, the species of the tree in my front yard, and I could translate that to German. Like that was my whole financial qualification to invest in real estate, right? And I had $1,000 in the bank. Now, I did have the advantage of having family members who'd been in real estate investing, like I had somebody I could call. So I had a lot of advantages, but the point was I didn't have like a big stash of cash to invest. So like if you're in that situation where you have $1,000 in the bank, like I've been there, I've had to do that. And one of the first ways I did deals was I found partners. And so there's lots of ways to partner with people, but just think about this, like the simple concept. I'm from the South. I know Justin and I can kind of compare notes on this one. I like eating like sweet potato pie, pumpkin pie. Like, I don't know, there's something about the South. We just like our desserts, right? Pecan pie. Well, what if you went to a place and they were having like sales on pecan pies and say, this is like a $20 pie that they're selling for like $5. You're like, oh my God, a pecan pie for $5. Like, this is amazing. But you had like no money in your pocket, and you called up your buddy and you're like, hey, you want to share this pecan pie with me? Like, it's a super deal, $5. You just got to Venmo this guy $5. And they're like, yeah, I'm all in. Great. And if the person who doesn't have the pie, I'm the one who found this pie, would I not be willing to give away half my pie because I have no pie right now, because I had no money, right? And it's the same concept in real estate. Like you need to stop thinking about being greedy and eating the whole pie, and just say a real estate deal is a piece of pie, is a whole pie. as a new investor, I just need a little piece. Maybe it's 25%, maybe it's 50%, but you got to have the deal. You got to have the pie. And that's the thing a lot of people miss is like, remember that puzzle. You got to have the property, you got to have the money. If you truly find a good deal, this is where the buy box is so important. If you truly find a good deal, there's always the money, always. And if there's not the money, you probably don't have a good enough deal. That's the rule. And I know as a beginner, that's hard to believe that. You're like, nah, I don't know about that. Like, I don't know anybody with money. Like, nobody in my life has any money. But I promise you, just trust me on this one. You got to kind of take a leap of faith here. If you find good deals, the money is there, but you got to learn how to structure it. This is where the knowledge compounds, you know? So like when I was a brand new investor, I would listen. I didn't have podcasts then. That shows how long I've been investing, but I would go to a class, I would read a book, I listened to some tapes or some CDs back in the day. And I would learn like, all right, here's a structure. You could put together a deal where your business partner, the person with the money, let them buy the deal. So let's say Justin's my money guy. So, hey, Justin, I've got this really good deal. It's like a $250,000 property. I could buy it for $150,000. I don't have the money. That's the problem. But this is a great deal. I'm willing to buy it. I'm willing to manage it. I'm willing to do all the work. Would you be willing to put up the money and we split the profits somehow on the back end, just in concept? Maybe you might say, no, I don't trust you, Chad. You know, I don't like somebody else I would do. So, but that's the question I would ask Justin. It's like, so you got to meet people like Justin, like Cody, like other people who might have some money, and you got to start talking to them about your deals. And it's as simple as that. Like I would literally have that conversation after a while. Like I wouldn't just come up to people and say, hey, my name's Chad. I got a deal. Would you want to put up half the money? But I would go to networking meetings. I would go to other places where real estate investors are hanging out. I would go to five meetings where people are saving money and have money. You will find that for every one person who has a deal in real estate, there's like 10 people who would like to have a deal, who have some money, but have no time and no interest. And so if you can match up with those people and figure out a way to structure your deal, either through just forming like a literal like LLC partnership, which I've done before, or there's some creative financing kind of ways to do it too. One of my favorites was letting the money partner buy the property, however they want to buy it, all cash, getting a loan, whatever. And then I would go and lease that property back from them. So just like you heard about, just doing a lease, I signed a contract saying I'm going to lease this property from Justin for $1,000 per month. And then I would also get an option to buy it back from Justin at like a higher price. So maybe I build in a profit for Justin of another $10,000 or some number that makes sense for him. So he makes some money on the cash flow, he makes some money on the price. But look what happens to me, the person who found the deal. I'm controlling this entire property for little or no money because Justin bought it. He's comfortable with the risk. He's like, if Chad gets run over by a bus, I'll just take the property back. I own it. And he's fine with that. But then this is literally what happened to me. I would go lease these properties out for 2 or 3 years. I would then sell that same property for $250,000. I would make like a $50,000 profit because I'd sold this property that I controlled, but never even owned, because I was able to go partner with somebody else. That's the idea. That's the power of that. There's other ways you could do it with no money, but just I want to kind of convey that there are ways out there to do it. At least, that's one of my favorite ways and one of the simplest ways. But other ways like seller financing, lease options, using private money. Those are some other ones I talked about in the book. But the concept is the same. You've got to find people with money and convince them to work with you and bring the skills you had to the table, and they have the money. That's you're combining forces to buy that pie.
Yeah, and just to back up what you're saying, I know as someone who doesn't really have enough time, or don't live in a city where I feel like there's a lot of great cash flowing options, I would love for somebody to find an awesome deal and me just to throw some cash their way and I can make some passive income. That's much more my style. That's the other thing, is not everyone is just looking for the same type of exposure. Like some people just don't want to go through all the work to find the deal. Some people just are looking for a place to passively park their money. And I know I'm one of those people. So like, I know that what Chad is saying definitely makes a lot of sense.
You're going to automatically get like 100,000 emails now from partners all over the country.
There you go. Well, so like someone like that is definitely like one part of what could be your team. Like if you need to team up with someone, but that's another thing that we always hear from real estate investors is how important it is to build out that team. Like what are some of the other personas that you think people really need to focus in on?
Yeah, so this is another, like my sports background really helped me out with real estate investing, because I used to love like reading books, and I still do, like really great coaches. Like John Wooden is a UCLA basketball coach, Hall of Famer. He has a little book called Wooden. It's just like full of little half-page gems. His chapters are like half a page, and you can read them like 10 seconds, but one of his chapters is that if you want to be the all-star, you have to build an all-star team. So like the star of the team, like he used to coach Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Bill Walton, these really all-star players, but he would convince those players that like, look, you're not going to be any good in a team sport unless the rest of your team is also really good. And so you might be the star who scores the most points. So as a real estate investor, you might be the one who makes all the profits, but you really do have to recruit a team in real estate. It's a team sport. This is like, if you want to just invest passively and have, like just press a button, like index funds are great. I love that too. But real estate, you actually have to build a team if you want to be successful. So that's a good and a bad if that's not your deal. And some of the key team members though, money is one of the most important. So either having like a lender, you might want to have like a mortgage lender who can give you a lot of different traditional conventional mortgage rates. That's a really important team member. But then also private money or maybe commercial debt, like commercial loans. Like if you go to the local bank, often there's a commercial lending department who loans money to investors into new construction, into other types of properties that are businesses trying to make money. It's a completely different department than the residential department. And you want to try to talk to both of those. I've borrowed money in both cases. And all of that's under the umbrella of money. But then on the other side, on the property side, you want to have, if you're going to not manage the property yourself, a property manager is one of the most critical pieces of the puzzle. And for me personally, that's one of my most important team members. So when I was living in Spain for a year last year, like my property managers were my eyes and ears. They're the ones doing the day-to-day work. I would text with them here and there, like, hey, we got a refrigerator we need to replace. It'll cost $900. Is that okay, Chad? Yes, go ahead. That kind of little details, but then also bigger strategic things. Hey, this property, we probably need to paint this property, or we need to replace this deck. Here's why. You got to have a trusting relationship with them. They got to feel bold enough to make those calls for you. And then you got to have an ongoing relationship with them where you can have like the long-term strategy and the long-term perspective on both of your sides. And so how do you find those people? This is, again, a networking thing. And for me, I found my property managers not overnight. Like, it wasn't like look them up on Google and first person I come to. It was more studying the market. It was talking to other investors. It was finding out, like, I would do a lot of searching for properties to buy, and I would see the signs around town. All right, here's that property manager. Here's that one. I would start noticing which ones actually did a good job managing their properties and which ones didn't, which ones like took care of their properties. I would look at their tenant screening criteria. That's an important one, because when you manage properties, one of the most important decisions you make is whether to let somebody live in your property or not, and how you screen for them. And so I encourage you to have your own tenant screening criteria written down. I'm happy to share some of mine, but if your property manager should have a very robust system for how they do it. And so when you're interviewing people, ask them, like, what makes a good tenant? How do you screen for them? What can you screen people on? What can you not? What kind of people are you looking for? What's your process like? What are your systems like? If they don't have systems, processes, and checklists, gone. Like, I've had some property managers who would say, yeah, but I just have a good gut feeling. I've been in the business for 20 years. I'm like, no. Like, not a chance. Like, you can't wing this. You can't fly by the seat of your pants. You got to have systems. And a good property management business has a bunch of little small transactions. They have to be systematized. They have to be process driven. And so the best ones will do that. And so you need to like focus on that, ask them questions about it. But then also you just have to have with all of your team members, you got to just meet them on a human level, whether that's over Zoom or in person. Like, do you trust this person? Are they somebody who seems to be talking a little too fast? Are they giving you time of day? Even though you're a rookie investor, are they giving you the time? Are they that maybe they're just too busy? They're not giving you the time. And so all of those are kind of like screening criteria you want to use. And yes, it does take time. Yes, it is a process, but it's such an important process that you don't want to shortcut that. Whoever team members you recruit to your team is going to be so important that you want to take some time to do it right.
Well, you mentioned it, so now you got to spill some of the secrets, Chad. What is your must-dos and must-haves for like the ideal tenant? What is your perfect tenant scenario? How do you screen for them?
Yeah, so let's start with the ideal tenant. So tenants are your most important team member, by the way. Like there's this kind of ethos out there on Twitter and other places. Like there's landlords and tenants
landlords
have to hate
are parasites.
Like you've heard that one too, right? But the reality is like I think my tenants are amazing. Like they allow my existence. But on the other side of that thing, we provide an amazing service to tenants. Like when you take care of your property, provide a quality property that's not a slummy property that you treat well and you are going to upkeep. What a great thing for the tenant too, because I'll add to that. This kind of gets to what an ideal tenant is. Some of my ideal properties are ones where a tenant stays for like 5 years, 10 years, 15 years sometimes. And to do that, you've got to screen for people who have a long-term stable mentality. So I've got some properties that are student rentals, right? Students stay for like a year or two. That's it. Like that's just, then they move on. That's kind of the nature of the beast. That's just what they're, and so we have to make a little bit more rent for the price we pay for it because they turn over more often. There's more expenses. But I also have another part of our portfolio that are single family houses, mobile homes that are just rented to families or people who just want to live there. That's their residence. And so when you're screening for them, you want to look for things like, can they pay on time? And there's ways to legally do that by looking at their income that they have, making sure their debt to income ratio is reasonable. This is what a bank would do when they're loaning you money, right? You don't want somebody who is paying 60% of the income they have to debts and rents and all that. That's just, they're upside down. They can't make that work. A more reasonable ratio is like 40%, 30%. And I know it's tough these days because rents are a little unaffordable. You can fudge a little bit on that debt to income ratio if you're in a higher cost of living area, just because it's tough. It's tough to make that one work. But you don't want to fudge on credit. You don't want to fudge on their history of whether they paid people on time. A credit history, for all the the knocks it tells you whether somebody pays on time. That's all it does. And you need to use that to your advantage and set, I like to set a score. So my lower end rentals, it might be currently when I'm recording this, it might be like a 600 score on the low end rentals. For the little bit higher end rentals, it might be like 650. I could probably up those a little bit. So most of the tenants we end up getting are higher than that. But the point here is you want to have some objective criteria that you can use that then it kind of takes the emotion out of it. And if somebody either qualifies for that or they don't, and you treat everybody fairly, you treat everybody the same. And and let's say they do qualify, because on your good properties, you'll have 3 or 4 people who qualify often. And then you want to then say, what are some other criteria that are important for me? For me, it's longevity. I want to have somebody who's going to stay for a long time. And so I actually just point blank asked them that during the pre-screening. Hey, like, what are your plans? Do you plan to stay here for a while? Do you have other plans? And I'll give you a quick story. We had a house, my wife and I self-managed one house that we used to live in. We always get 5 or 6, 7 applications. And last time we did that, we had 2 really good candidates, and they met the credit score, they met the income criteria, but the one of them had a lot more income and one of them had a lot better credit. But I ended up going with the one who had not as good a credit and not as good income, because when I asked them the question, how long are they going to stay? Their situation, their story was leading towards being a long-term tenant. Whereas the other one was going to build a house. They're like, yeah, we're just kind of here until we build a house in a year or 2, and then we're going to move on. Wrong answer for me. Like I want you to stay long. And I know that's good for some rentals. Like some people who want to do month-to-month rentals, that's what they want. They're looking for somebody like that. But in our long-term rental, that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for somebody who'll stay even longer. And now that tenant we chose has paid on time every single month. They've been amazing. The yard looks better than it's ever looked. They are now just renewed for their 3rd year. I think they're going on 4 or 5 years, so you make a lot more money as a landlord attracting those kind of tenants who don't leave, because every time they leave, that's like $500, $1,000, $1,500 that you have to spend fixing the property up. So for a long-term rental, that's more what I'm looking for. If you're going to do the short-term rental or the midterm rental, which is also a viable strategy, you'll be looking for those people who are leaving every 3 months, but then you're going to charge a premium. You're going to have to charge a higher rent, and you're going to build your properties such that it kind of makes sense for that kind of tenant.
And I think this question I'm about to ask will tie well into this conversation as well, into just this overall sentiment around like not getting too greedy. So if you find someone like this, you find a really good tenant who's staying a long time, they're really taking care of the product, but you've also got like maybe in that market, the average cost of rent is really going up. Like, how do you balance that so that you don't run off a really good tenant, but because you are going to save some money in the fact that you're not having to turn it over versus like maximizing the income?
Yeah. I mean, I think in general, the strategy is to be below the market rent. So this is another thing that differentiates a small and mighty investor, I think, from like a Wall Street hedge fund investor. The Wall Street hedge fund investor, they are looking at numbers on a spreadsheet. We're looking at people who we know their name, who live in a property. And I think there's a difference there. And that doesn't mean we're not in business. That doesn't mean we're not trying to make a profit. But I think we can look at it and say, you know what, I'm making enough money. I'm making good money, but I am going to raise the rent a little bit. I'll give you a real example. Like I have a rental where the market rent's probably $1,800 to $2,000. Like I could push it and get 2,000. 1,800 is probably the market rent. I was at 1,550 with my tenant. And this is the person who's been there a couple of years, but the rents have been like going crazy. Like they've been growing really fast. So I sent a letter last year saying, we've got to raise rents. Our insurance has been going up, our taxes, our maintenance, everything's going up. but we want to raise it $50 per month for the next year. We think that's fair. Here's a list of other rentals in the area are going for $1,800 to $2,000. So we would love for you to stay. We think we hope this is fair. Here's our proposal. They renewed. They said, okay, good to go. But the point is, you got to keep upping the rent, but you can do it at a rate that still makes you money, that still does well, and you got to figure out what works for you. But it definitely pays to have long-term tenants, and then if they move out, then you can up the rent to the market rate and get the rate that you want.
So I'm actually curious to hear your opinion on this. I've seen this as kind of the anti-real estate movement on Twitter, on Instagram, and other places, and we kind of talked about a little bit earlier. You were talking about the difference between operating expenses and capex. And here's the argument that people say. They're like, it's not worth being a real estate investor if you're only going to have like, 1, 2, or 3 properties. Because let's say I buy 2 properties in 2 years, and then all of a sudden the same month, both roofs need to be replaced. It's $40,000 and I don't have $40,000 saved up. I'm screwed. I'm in the hole. This whole thing is going to crap. So that's the kind of argument I hear, like why people shouldn't be like a small and mighty real estate investor. I guess we could define small and mighty as well. Like if there's like a minimum that you recommend, but that's kind of, and it's a somewhat logical argument. It's not like one of those just like landlords or parasites argument. It's like a somewhat logical argument. You could have like the roof and the heating systems go out on multiple properties. So I guess 1, let's just define small and mighty. Is there a minimum? And then 2, what do you think about that general statement?
Well, I mean, on the minimum side, I don't think I think 1 or 2 is fine for a lot of people. I'll give you an example. You guys both know Jillian Johnsrud out in Montana. Jillian has 2 properties. I just had her on my podcast recently. She has 2 properties. They net her, I think, $1,500 per month. And she has some other income sources, of course, but that's a nice, comfortable number for her. She likes 2 rental properties. She's had 4 or 5 in the past, so she kind of fluctuates between 2 and 5. But that's $1,500 allows her and her family to travel like 8 months a year, because between their other income and the income they have with those 2 properties, and it's a manageable number. So on the low end, I think that's fine. Now, the argument you might get, if I was being snarky on Twitter and responding to that, I'd probably say, well, if your logic is right that we might have to spend $40,000, and so we shouldn't have 2 properties, so we should own 50 properties or 100 properties so that we have like 10 or 50 times that $40,000 and have $400,000 all at one time, right? Because going bigger doesn't solve any of that problem. Like they might say, well, you have income from the other properties to pay for the one. But no, like when you get bigger, like the problems get bigger, like the things you have to pay attention to get bigger. And that's not an argument for not getting big. There are people who do it successfully. Like I'm glad we have like Elon Musk, and I'm glad we have some of these huge investors who syndicate and do all that stuff, because they provide a outlet for people to invest their money with them. Great. That's perfect. I'm just not talking to that. I'm not talking to either one of those people. I'm talking to the person who is more of a DIY, who wants to have a little more control over the situation. And for you and me, for us, having a manageable portfolio of properties that gets you big enough to have enough financial sustenance that you need, but it's not so big that it's overwhelming your life. And the argument that the Twitter real estate argument would be, well, if you just get bigger, you can build systems, you can hire people, you can do all those things. And I said, yeah, of course you can. Like of course that's what you can do, but that's not easy. Like that's not what most people are built for. Most people are not business entrepreneurs who know how to, read traction and do an EOS operating system and do all these things. If you don't know what those mean, I'm
Yeah.
explaining my point. Exactly. It's like you don't need to do all that. Real estate business is a super simple business. It's something that you don't have to be like a business MBA to figure out. You can just get some simple systems. You can manage it, part-time. You can learn. Yes, you're going to have to learn some things, but you don't have to be like a rocket science business person. And then you can move on with your life. Like you can do these other things in your life. And I think that's the point. Like the point is like, just know your level, know your role, know what kind of entrepreneur investor you want to be. And I think this is kind of a perfect segue for people who, hey, they've been investing in index funds. They like that kind of, but they don't like all the passiveness of that. They don't like the fact they don't have any control over that. So like balancing index fund investing with some simple real estate investing is a really good 1-2 punch, because then you can get the benefits of real estate, which are a really strong income. So you don't have to like sell your assets in order to live off of them. You can just live off the rent. And you can also have the stability of getting some loans when you're early on and you don't have a lot of cash. Like how do you grow? You can get some long-term fixed mortgages. And then the point that we talked about earlier that I'll kind of full circle, when you're ready to live off your income, there's this beautiful kind of transition you can make that instead of growing to more properties, you save up that same amount of money to buy more properties and just start paying off some properties. And you start making like a 6, 7, 8, 9, 10% cash yield just on paying your debt off. And you keep it simple, you make cash flow. And then that's when you can start like harvesting and living off your income as well.
And while we're on the subject of simple and like thinking about, the difference between something like just being purely passive in an index fund versus what this might look like, what does a week look like for you? Like how much time are you having to spend? You kind of walked us through, this is a little bit of a larger version of Small and Mighty, but so someone, who's got 5 properties or even, the amount of properties you have, what kind of time frame should they be thinking they got to invest in this?
Because I get this question a lot, I've actually tracked it. And for the last 5 years or so, it's been 2 hours per
with
week.
100 doors,
on
right?
average. And yeah, 100 doors. Yeah. And I have a business partner, so maybe he spends 2 hours per week, but I do a little bit more on the managing the manager side than he does, but then it goes back and forth. So, like 100 properties, 2 to 4 hours per week between the two of us. And I've asked my own students, the people I've coached and worked with, the average for like most people who have 10, 15 properties is 4 hours per month, 4 or 5 hours per month. And again, let's qualify this. The real estate starts off as like a startup business. It's like, it takes a lot of time, a lot of effort. You got to build your team. You got to find the deal. So it's not passive at all. It's complete opposite. It's not a passive business. So if that's not good for you, then don't do real estate. Right. But the cool thing is it starts off as like a venture capital startup, or like a startup business, but then it ends up as a relatively passive enough business. Because I say passive enough because the dream of having a completely passive investment is kind of silly. Like, why is that the standard? The standard is, do you have enough time to do what it is you want to do in your life? And my answer has been absolutely. I've been able to travel to Spain, been able to live in Ecuador. I've been able to write a book. I've been able to coach my kids' volleyball team. I've been able to work out. I made the list of all the things I want to do, and I'm doing those. Like, I pinch myself. I know I'm fortunate to be able to do that, but the time I have to spend on my real estate and my rental property portfolio, now that it's mature and stable, it hasn't been an impediment at all. And so it's passive enough. You have this business, this very systematized business that generates, for me, in my case, 100% of what I needed to live on with 2 hours per week. Like that trade-off is just like, it's perfect. I'm totally fine with that.
I would make that trade-off any day of the week or any week of the year. I think that's fantastic. 2 hours per week, 100 properties is nuts, or 100 doors is nuts. Something we haven't really talked about too much is kind of like some of the, I guess, hedges or just some of the other benefits of real estate that I don't think they get talked about enough. And I see this is another Twitter battles, is like you see the rent versus buy argument all the time, and you have people like so diehard hardcore. You have like the Ramits of the world who are just never buy a property. I know it's not exactly true, but there are some people who are just so hardcore in the rent camp, some people so hardcore in the buy camp. There's so many different benefits of owning and buying real estate. So I was hoping we could just quickly touch on a few of those, because I don't think this gets enough limelight.
Yeah, I think I'll just make a list. I think the tangibility of real estate and that it's so simple and understandable is really underrated. I would go like quote Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett always says, invest in things that are simple and understandable, things you understand, things that, don't worry about if everybody else understands. Like, do you understand the people investing your money? And we've all lived in a house or an apartment. We've lived in real estate our whole life. You know what a good neighborhood is. You know what a junky property is and what a quality property is. Like, I don't have to teach you those things. Like, those are just kind of something you know. So that's a huge benefit. So invest in what you know. Real estate's got it. I think it's kind of cool to invest in, tech companies and all that. Like, that's fun. But in Bitcoin, like but do you really understand it? Or I would challenge. I would challenge that. So real estate, simple, understandable. The other thing is, I think about like the worst case scenarios, and I call this like a creative pessimism. Like think, let's go bad. Let's go like Great Depression style. And are people going to need a place to live? In most parts of the country, yes. So I have properties that they rent for $1,500 today, maybe $1,800 in a Great Depression. I've kind of studied the Great Depression and what happened. It's sort of hard to get some of the data. The prices went down by like 70, 80% during the Great Depression. But do you guys have a guess, or maybe you already know these stats? How much did the rent on average go down around the country during the Great Depression?
Yeah, I was going to say 20 or 25.
You guys are close. It went down about 30% on average around the country during the 10 years of the Great Depression. 30%. And for those, like, that's not that much compared to what I thought I'm thinking like disaster, this is going to be, if I'm property rented for $1,800, it's going to rent for $900 during a depression. The point is, like, the whole rental business is pretty much tied to the labor market. So if the labor market in the average salary does pretty well in your town, the rents are going to kind of be tied to that. They might go down, they might go up, but there's a floor there that cushions you. And I've even joked with my business partner, and like, if we really got in a dire situation, like, let's find a renter who can fix houses, like fix up roofs. We'll let him. You live there, you fix our roofs on the other houses. Let's have somebody else who has like a farm, and they can trade us chickens and eggs and food for the houses. And like, I know that's kind of crazy, like it's like prepping kind of thinking, but the point is, like, that's an exercise you can go through in your mind to see what is the value of this asset in a lot of weird situations. And real estate is just like it's a fundamental. It's got to be there for a lot of people. And so I think that, in addition to simple and understandable, really kind of differentiates real estate for the average investor compared to other assets. And I'll add one more. We could probably make a long list here, but inflation is like in the news a lot. And so inflation, what happens when your dollar today doesn't buy the same amount of stuff, or the dollar tomorrow doesn't buy the same amount of stuff as it does today? Like, that's a problem for investors and savers. And real estate, while not perfect, has a pretty good track record of keeping up with inflation. Even a free and clear house, the price, if it's in demand and people want to buy it, tends to go up in value. The rent, as we were saying earlier, kind of tends to go up in value with salaries, although it's exceeded that lately, which is kind of a interesting challenge for a lot of people, a lot of renters, that we have to solve as a society. But it's a hedge, it's an inflation hedge. And if you add leverage to the equation, if you're in the growth phase and use a lot of leverage, if you have a 3% debt or a 6% debt or even an 8% debt over a 30-year period, and the rents and the prices go up, that is an equation for making a lot of wealth, because that inflation is kind of withering away.
Yeah.
Is that the right word? It's kind of withering away, eroding away the value of your debt that you have to pay back. So when you pay back $100,000 10, 20 years from now, that's a lot. The dollars you're paying it back with are worth a lot less. So it's a super inflation hedge if that's your game.
My brain went to whittling away because I'm thinking about me and my granddad, cutting sticks up down in the South. So that's
what I was trying to say.
I don't know
Thank
these
you.
words.
So this is a bit of an open-ended question, but just as we were thinking about specifically this small but mighty, is there anything we haven't talked about that you think is like a good thing to remember or differentiator, or just like to sell the idea of a small mighty versus focusing on going all out and buying as many properties as humanly possible?
Yeah, I think we focus a lot on the small. At least I do. Like, how big is too small? How big do you need to get? And I like to focus on the mighty too. Like, the mighty side of things is really, this is a business in financial independence in general, but using real estate as one of your power tools within financial independence it's like a power tool. It really is. It's something that can magnify and get you. I just want to look at the big picture. It can get you from like scratch to being a financially independent investor in 10 to 15 years. Like that, people do that all the time. And if you step back and think about that, like, think about society at large, like, people are retiring at 65, 70, 75 years old with not enough savings, like with not enough to support themselves. And here we are talking about a pretty reasonable plan to own 10, 15 properties paid off free and clear, producing $10,000 per month in a 10 to 15 year period. That's amazing. Like, that is a mighty investor. Like, and if you add on all these things about how simple it is for people to understand it, how there's a ton of financing available for regular people to get started. You can get started with like a very small down payment. If you did a house hack, like if you moved into the house and then rented out some of the bedrooms, or if you moved into a duplex and rented out the extra unit, like, there's so many creative ways to get started with just a tiny bit of money. And that's amazing. Like that. So I just want to emphasize that fact that, like, the big picture strategy of using real estate, while it does have its challenges, you have to learn, you got to put some time into it, you got to take some risks here. But on the other side of that, I can't think of a better way to actually get to financial independence and use it as a tool to start, use it as a tool to grow, use it as a tool to exit and actually live off your income, It's worked really well for me. And so I'm obviously a big evangelist for this concept. It's not the only way to build wealth. It's not the only way to get financially independent. But I think if you take the small and mighty approach, the benefit of that is it keeps you focused on the main thing, which is financial independence, which is the freedom, which is the flexibility and the optionality to do these things. And that's my motto with my podcast and with everything else, is do what matters. Like, you're investing in real estate so that you can have the freedom to do what matters, so that you can spend more time with your kids, so that you can travel, so you can start this nonprofit that you've always wanted to start, so that you can just sleep in more if that's what you want to do. Like, I don't know, like, there's whatever, I'm not judging whatever matters to you. I just think it's pretty cool that this same tool we can all use can get you there, and all of us there. And that's what kind of pumps me up about it. I don't need to spend time on podcasts and do all this for money. Like, I do it because it's like I get a high out of seeing other people achieve one property at a time, achieve financial independence, and get to hear those stories. Like, it's just amazing that's
Well,
possible.
appreciate you, Chad, and all you do. And I know you've impacted thousands, myself included. You are definitely someone who I looked up to when I started my own real estate journey. We unpacked as much as we could in our time slot together, but I know you have a whole bunch more. This book is pretty thick, by the way. This thing's, for those who are watching on video, this thing's got some weight to it, Chad. So where do you want to send people? Where can people follow up? Where can people get the book? Where can people learn more about becoming a small and mighty real estate investor?
Well, thank you guys for having me on. First of all, you guys do an amazing job. Love your show. And if people want to get the book, they can go to anywhere they buy books. So Amazon, Barnes and Noble. It's on Audible as well. You're not going to get to hear my good Southern accent when you listen on Audible. Unfortunately, I didn't record the Audible book, but there is somebody else recording it, and he did a very good job. You can also get it on Bigger Pockets, and I'll provide a link to you guys if you want to put it in the show notes. Some of the bonuses at Bigger Pockets you get, like, I did a couple pretty cool bonuses. Like, one was, we talked about the 2-hour work week. Like, what does that look like? And actually made a little calendar showing a week by week, like, what are the things I actually do during the week, and then when do I do my real estate, and what that looks like. And then I have an exercise where I ask you to actually, like, go through and make your ideal week. Like, what does your week look like? How would you spend your time, so that you can work it backwards? And I find, like, focusing on time as the number one asset is just an important theme. That money is just a tool to get you that time back and to have that flexibility. And so I have that bonus. I've also got a bonus chapter I wrote called Being a Small and Mighty Investor in a Changing Economy. So when interest rates are going up, when prices seem high, when, should I be buying properties or not? So I just wanted to make it relevant to kind of the space and time where we are in 2023. So you get those. There's a couple more bonuses there as well, but those are some of the core bonuses you get if you go to the Bigger Pockets website and buy it from my publisher.
Well, like Cody said, thank you so much for giving us some time. And I hope I can run into you again at maybe a FinCon, maybe accidentally stumble into one of your mastermind groups and be politely asked to leave, just anything like that.
I will never ask you to leave, Justin. You're welcome anytime, buddy.